Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first panel of 2024, the first YA debut panel, the first YA fantasy debut panel, the first of firsts for 2024. I'm so excited to be joined by all of these amazing debut authors, and I cannot wait for you all to chat and for us to find out more about my very selfishly crafted questions after reading all the books. So if you don't know who I am, my name's Lily. I'm the moderator for the panel, and I'm also like the face behind Utopia State of Mind on the internet. So now we're going to have our authors introduce themselves, talk about their books, and then we're going to dive into the questions that I've come up with. If you have any questions at all during the chat, then definitely put them in the chat box somewhere on your screen, and I will remember to get back to them when it's question time. So we are going to start with author intros now.
Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine Sky. I am the author, I just dropped my book. I am the author of Daughter of the Bone Forest, which comes out on February 27th. This is a sapphic YA fantasy, as many of ours are YA fantasy, about a ranch girl who gets embroiled in politics at this magic school and ends up being courted by the princess of the kingdom. So if you're interested in discussions about war and privilege and also some fun sapphic goodness with a commoner ex-royalty romance, then check out my book. And there's currently a pre-order campaign going on right now. If you pre-order from my local indie book people, it can ship anywhere in the US, then you will get a art print and a bookmark and a personalized signed copy. So
hi, everyone. My name is Robin Wasley, and my book, Dead Things Are Closer Than They Appear. Is it doing the shimmer? Is it upside down? It is. All right. Dead Things Are Closer Than They Appear. It's coming out next week on February 13th, 2024. It's a YA contemporary fantasy. I like to describe it as a voicey love letter to genre mashy CW shows. But my version is a deeply average Korean girl having to navigate a magical apocalypse and save the world. So if you're interested in someone who just happens to be there when things happen, and then ends up having to save the world, then this one's for you.
Is it me? Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Anya Poranek. I am the author of Where the Dark Stands Still, which is a YA gothic fantasy based on Polish folklore. It follows a village healer who, desperate to get rid of her magic, ends up going to an enchanted forest and making a very questionable bargain with a forest demon, and then living with him for a year in his manor. And there are shenanigans and there are secrets and a lot of Slavic demons and a lot of forest metaphors. And this comes out February 27th.
Hi, everybody. I'm Camilla Cole, and I am the author of So Let Them Burn, which came out on, January 16th. This came out on January 16th. I pitch it as a Jamaican-inspired Joan of Arc with dragons. And to echo Jasmine, you can still order So Let Them Burn from Books of Wonder if you want this amazing, sparkling gold foil print while supplies last. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you guys.
I am Devin Greenlee. My book Evergreen came out on January 16th. It is about a magical gardener who falls with the boy next door, but suspects that the boy next door is breaking into the secret garden. So, you really want to look out for that kind of stuff. It has all that gooey, lovey feeling and everything, and, an impending sense of magical doom. So what else could we not love with that? If you want a special edition of it, Rainbow Crate Book Box is doing special art with it and a bonus chapter at the end. So if you want to see what an epilogue for these characters look like, then check it out.
Perfect. So if now that you all know what all the books are about, you can see that we have a variety of different stories, settings, characters going on in all of these books. So I want to start off with the very first, I know, very basic question, which is about the topic of being a debut author. And so I would love to know, what was the first idea, concept, character, scene, setting? Like, what was the very first image, I guess, you had in your mind of your book? Jasmine, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Daughter of the Bone Forest, the initial concept of in this world, there are lands that are basically sentient. So, the Bone Forest is one of those lands that's basically a living, creepy bone forest, forest of the dead. And then there's other magical lands throughout this kingdom. And that idea started way back when I was in college. A decade ago now, actually. It was summer 2014, but it expanded into what it is today in the summer of 2019 when I visited Oregon for work. And Oregon basically created the Cursed Kingdom. So all of the magical lands are now inspired by very beautiful natural landmarks in Oregon. And then, so that was in summer of 2019. And then in fall of 2019, it was like witchy Halloweeny season. And I was like, I want to write a witch book. And those ideas combined. And so now it's a witchy magic land, princesses, war type of a story. So it all just mashed together. And I wrote the first draft for NaNoWriMo in November of 2019. And now it's coming out. It's pretty crazy.
Can I just take a moment to complain that you just informed us that 2014 was 10 years ago?
Oh no, yeah,
why would you say that to us?
I didn't realize until I said it, and then I was like,
like I was having a whole existential crisis during your entire answer. I just want to let you know. I'm sorry. Please go on.
It's all my fault. Someone else can answer now.
Is it?
I'll go. So as far as like the concept goes, I was actually pitched the idea of this book of like the magical gardener, but I wanted to take it a step further and wanted to give him his own magic. And I personally have always had a love for Poison Ivy from Batman and Robin, like Uma Thurman with the two buns. So like I really wanted to give a character that could control plants like that. So I did some digging into like Hellenistic mythology, and I found wood nymphs, which were dryads, but in like the mythology, they were all women. So I was like, how cool would that be if it's the first male dryad ever born? And what if he's kind of like a dud and doesn't have powers of his own? No spoilers, but you know, things happen throughout the book. But yeah, that's where my concept came from. My love of Uma Thurman and a little bit of Kill Bill action. So, you know, not the most creative, but here we are.
I can go next since I was so chatty earlier. So I started way back in, I won't even say, with this book called Have Mercy by Jada Jones and Danny Bennett, which was a adult fantasy that featured two countries at war, and one country was fighting with giant metal dragons that were powered by magic. And I was like, that's really cool. I'm going to write a book about metal dragons one day. And then at some point, I just had this idea of a town that was called Dead Egg because there was a dead egg in the center of the town. And I was like, I'm going to use that one day. That's so cool and interesting. And then I saw Pacific Rim, and they had, you know, the giant metal monsters fighting giant real monsters, which turned the giant metal dragons into fighting actual real dragons. And then in 2018, Zendaya went to the Met Gala dressed as Joan of Arc for the Heavenly Bodies theme. And that's when it all kind of like came together into one huge thing where it's like this chosen one figure with the magic of the gods, you know, helped her country, which had giant metal dragons, fight against a dragon riding empire. And then, you know, it's set 5 years later when she's like, war's over, still powerful, kind of bored. What do I do now? And so those were the images that kind of came together for me.
Shall I go next? Oh, Robin, did you want to go next? Okay. So I have always loved Howl's Moving Castle, and that was always kind of my starting point for this. I love the book especially. It holds such a special place in my heart, and I wanted to do something similar, but incorporate Polish folklore and mythology into it, which was something that I had done a lot of research into for a prior book. And theoretically, this book was a rewrite of that very first book. But that very first book was like a cutesy cottagecore, just kind of nothing book with like fairies in it. And when it came to, and I wrote that one, shelved it, wrote another one, shelved it. And then I was like sitting there, I was like, I want to write a book, but I don't have anything more to work, like I don't have any ideas. And then I remember I was like texting my friends, and I was like, because I still loved that very first book. I loved the concept, but I didn't like the execution. And I was like, what if I took this cutesy cottagecore book that was like Howl's Moving Castle, but worse, and I made it a horror? And it kind of all spiraled from there. I just kind of found ways to incorporate as much Polish mythology and Polish folklore into it as possible. I did a lot of research into like late 19th, early 20th century Poland and the countryside, and like the different traditions and foods and superstitions that I had, a lot of them I had grown up with, but I didn't really know their origins. So I kind of started researching all of that, and then basically just found a way to shove it all into a book. And that's how Where the Dark Stands Still was born. So.
Okay, so for Dead Things Are Closer Than They Appear, I'll say that the first thing that happened for me was the main character Sid and the love interest Brian stuck in a tree. I had that image first. I had that scene. I had the dialogue. That was the first scene I ever wrote out of the entire book when I had no idea what the story was going to be yet. And I knew like from the get-go that that was the one scene that could never hit the cutting room floor. So I'm a character first writer. I know the main character. I know how she talks. I know the other characters and how she relates to them. I get snippets of dialogue. I hear people talking in my head. And then the sort of plot is built around that, which is why I end up having like these like wild things happening like all at once. But I definitely knew character-wise I wanted there to be a superpower element, but I didn't want it to be like people are born heroes or that like a power is bestowed upon someone and they become a hero. I wanted that power to say something about who they were, to like come from them, and who they are then informs what that power is and what it evolves to be. And so coming from that, like people are going to be like, why do you have like magic superpowers and also a zombie apocalypse happening at the same time? And I'm going to tell you that a lot of it is because I know the arcs, like I know where they begin and where they end. And the plot is me just trying to get them from point A to point B. And like the zombie part was like me just being like, this needs to be harder for them, like traveling. It needs to be hard. How do I make it hard? Zombies. Sounds great. So yeah, it's a superpower / zombie apocalypse book. And that's how it came about.
I agree. I think that the zombies make it harder. Just want to chime in there. The next question was probably one of my favorite questions, and so I'm just gonna like selfishly throw it to the front of the queue. But I thought that when I was reading all your books, and they all have very different like starting points and different settings, but I thought a main theme that you're all kind of grappling with throughout the course of your novels are power and our role in power, feeling powerless, embracing power, exploring our identity in relation to power. So I'd love to know from all of you if you could talk about your decision to explore this topic in relation to your main characters, and also if you always knew that this was going to be something that you wanted to explore in the book, or if it just kind of like organically happened. Robin, do you want to start, because you were already talking a little bit about power?
Sure. So I think what it started it for me was the idea of like strong female characters. And I just want to be clear that I love strong female characters, but I also think that it's come to mean a certain thing, like somebody who like kicks ass and just like physically is a go-getter and very like active and with agency. And I just wanted to sort of play with my idea and like what that meant, like what it means to sort of be strong. Because in my book, like the way that I see it, I'm like, most of us would not wake up on day one of an apocalypse and be like, all right, let me get out my bow and arrow and like head out into the wilderness and like kill zombies and like save the world. Like most of us, or at least me, I'd be like, look at the window and be like, and I'm out. Take me out in wave one. I just want to go. Like, don't even make me try to survive. So, and I think like at some point we've all sort of felt like that. Like we're like not extraordinary. We don't have like any like visible special skills, and like we alone are that way. Nobody else, everyone around us is like beautiful and special, and like that's how we feel. And like my whole thing was like, I'm gonna embrace the ordinary in this and like show how that like embracing yourself and who you are at your core is like is enough. And it's like what helps you, like not just, it helps the main character not just fight this particular battle, but like just being a person in the world. Like there are qualities about ourselves that are powerful that we take for granted. Specifically in this case, like emotion and empathy, which like, especially for women, are traits set up to be like why you couldn't survive in a brutal world. But in this particular case, like in this book, it's a story about how those very qualities are what give her power, and like without them, like she would not have been the one to save the world.
Are we going in order, or can we just go? Okay. I'll add on to what Robin was saying, because I think my main character also has a very similar character journey in terms of coming into power with things like embracing your emotions and empathy, and especially in relation to kind of the world. Her world is very religious. And a lot of kind of the idea that like this magic that she has is evil, and all these things that she's kind of told to suppress and told over and over again that basically she's evil, she's this and that. And a lot of her journey is coming to terms with the fact that this thing that she has, that she's been given, she's been born with, isn't actually evil, it is beautiful, and kind of embracing that power, and also embracing things like her femininity, her empathy, and all these like traits that like growing up, I feel like also, I don't know if you guys had this, but I grew up with the time where like the YA protagonist was very like rejected everything feminine. Like she didn't wear dresses, and she was, and I kind of wanted to create an antithesis to that, where it was, she's strong because she's feminine, and she's strong because she has all these traits that like, you were always told that like, oh, they're not good. Those are like, they make you weak. And it's like, no, these are actually the traits that allow her to kind of conquer a lot of the difficulties she runs into in the book, dealing with a horrible forest demon who, is completely emotionally incompetent. So I think that was kind of her coming into her power, and it's like a story that I've always like really enjoyed. So I enjoyed telling. So.
Are we playing chicken?
I think we are. I'll go.
Okay.
So with mine, it's actually the main character struggling with the lack of power, because his sister is this prodigy who can like grow rose bushes when she's 3 years old, and his mom can control an entire garden and like make new fruits, and like she takes care of extinct plants and like Venus flytraps that are like the size of like hubcaps, and like it's this entire world. But he's always felt like he doesn't quite fit because he doesn't have that gift of his own. So he kind of has to make do with what he has. So like he has the knowledge of the plants, and he has the knowledge of like where like certain plants can be magical, but he doesn't have the power to really do anything, which comes in handy because he's sneaky and he's a little bit resourceful. So like he still uses what he needs to like sneak out and kind of pull one over on his mom and everything. But really what the whole point of like the book is like maturing and coming to terms with yourself and everything, because he's been locked up in this apartment for 17 years of his life, so like he doesn't know any better, so it's kind of been stunted in a way. But as soon as he starts coming out of that, like weird things start happening. I don't want to give too many spoilers away, you know what I mean, but maybe a bigger spoiler is if this ever gets a sequel, I really want to explore like, okay, so in book 1 we talked about like a lack of power or a getting of power, but in book 2 I'd love to talk about how power corrupts if it's too strong. So that's where I'm at.
Camilla, you want to go? You want to go last?
Yeah.
Okay. We have, I think, similar answers.
Yeah.
In comparison, because both of us have very strong characters. So in my book, my two main characters are both definitely grappling with power in slightly different ways. They're very much comparisons of foils for each other. Could not think of that word. So the love interest, the princess of the kingdom, is a very powerful witch, and she has literally been prophesized to be the one that will lead this kingdom to victory in the next big war that is coming, that has been prophesized. Versus my main character, Rosie, she has a lot of power. She's a familiar. She can shapeshift into animals, and her very first animal was the bone wolf, which is the most powerful of the bone animals, and means that she holds a lot of intrinsic magic that a witch could use to power their own spells and things. So this is this like relationship that, you know, the princess that Shaw wants with Rosie is because it would make Shaw extremely more powerful, you know, if they had this relationship. Rosie doesn't want anything to do with it. She's like, I just give me my simple life on this bone horse ranch that I raise horses, and like, leave me alone. I don't want to deal with politics. I don't want to deal with the war. Like, leave me alone. So we have two characters, one who's very powerful and has been raised to sort of embrace the duty of her power and of her place in this prophecy, and the other who is also very powerful and could really help in this situation, but is like, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to be your weapon. You know, I just want to live a simple life. So that is the push and pull of power in this book.
Yeah, so as Jasmine was saying, like very similar to her, I had, you know, my book is a dual POV story between two sisters, but the narrative itself is actually about three women, all of whom were thrust into power from a very simple life. You have, you know, Farron, who is featured on the cover of the book, and Alara were raised in this like very, very small town, one of those towns that are so small that it's like doesn't even appear on a map of the country. And the country was at war, and Farron would pray every night, like, please don't let me die. And the gods happened to hear her prayer and give her their magic to channel. And so she went off to war, and then her sister was like, where the hell is my sister? So she ran off after her, and by the time their parents realized that they were both gone, like they were both gone. And then part of what the gods asked Farron to do was to go and find the true queen, the heir to the throne, who was living on a farm, completely unaware that she was royalty, you know, that whole classic story. And they had to use their abilities to put Aveline, as the name of the queen, on the throne. So all three women are basically like, they felt powerless in a situation. They were completely normal people. And then all of a sudden, for various reasons, they were thrust into power. And now 5 years after that, you know, mythological situation occurred, like they're all dealing with power in their own ways. You know, Aveline was a teenager when she was put on the throne, and now she's like 22 years old and still dealing with the fact that she's like very, very young compared to other rulers, and kind of like figuring out what to do with no guidance because her parents died during the war. Her moms were killed. And then, you know, Farron is the kind of person you would never put in charge of anything, but she was the one who was chosen to have all of these godlike powers, all of these like books written about her, all of these like legends and songs and merchandising even. And she's just grappling with the fact that like she's been told who she is her entire life and she has no idea who she is or what she wants. And she's traumatized essentially. And then you have Alara, who lives in the shadow of her younger sister, who is like someone she loves and wants to protect, but also like looms so large that she has like she knew who she was more or less and what she wanted, but those dreams just seem so small compared to what Farron did. So she's grappling with her own definition of power in a way. And I just thought it was like a super interesting like push and pull to have these three characters who, you know, had greatness thrust upon them and how they do and don't like live up to that image of greatness.
So I want to jump into some questions that kind of tease out some more themes and some more similarities between books. And I want to first start off with Evergreen and Where the Dark Stands Still, because I thought that the relationships that you're both putting such effort into in terms of character development and character arcs are so heartwarming in the sense that they're exploring trust and like how trust is built and lost and, you know, all the different mistakes involved in a relationship. So I'd love to know from both of you if you could talk about how you developed and discussed trust, relationships, and also the humanity versus the otherworldliness, which is also, I feel like, a sub-theme that both of your books talk about, which, as I was writing the question, I was like, how do I say this without it being like super, super spoilery? But I think that that's all I actually can say in my question. Anya, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think trust is one of my favorite topics to explore in a book, especially when we have two characters that I think trust is really at the core of their dynamic. And this idea that like Liska goes into this book, she meets the Leshy, who is a demon. He is absolutely not trustworthy. She knows this from the start. She knows that, you know, none of his intentions are good. She's made this like dubious bargain that she knows it's not going to end well. So she starts off the book with absolutely zero trust. There's no trust between them at all. And then slowly as the book progresses, and Leshy kind of grows attached to her, even though he doesn't want to. And he starts kind of showing her that, you know, he's on her side. She can trust him. And she does slowly begin to open up to him and to trust him and to kind of also rely on him in the sense that like she's carrying a lot of her own baggage and she's trying desperately to be optimistic about it and to be like, everything is fine. I'm going to figure this out. Like, absolutely will not address the fact that she is traumatized from things that have happened to her because of a magic that she's always been told is evil. And so for her, like opening up to the Leshy is the relationship is super important to both of them, for both of them to overcome kind of a lot of past baggage and a lot of past trauma that they're both dealing with. So for Liska, it's a lot about, you know, slowly learning to trust. And well, she's quite trusting to others, but just not to this one particular demon because he is in fact 700 years old and full of questionable intentions. While on the other hand, one of Leshy's kind of major character flaws is the fact that he doesn't want to trust Liska in the way that he is afraid that if he tells her everything that's been going on with him, she will leave him. And this is the first person that he's ever like truly wanted to love in a way. And so for him, sorry, my cat is like screaming outside the door. I don't know if you can hear that or not. But for him, it's very much like a lot of the problems in this book arise because the Leshy just absolutely refuses to trust Liska because he is so deeply afraid of losing her. And I think that that's a very interesting, like, an interesting contrast between them is the fact that Liska slowly learns to trust while Leshy is so adamant about not trusting that he kind of inadvertently causes so many problems in this book. And then slowly has to kind of unlearn that as well. So yeah, they're a lot of fun, these two. But yeah, I think it's always a very fun topic to explore though, kind of the different ways we trust and who we trust and why, and kind of like, you know, I think there's a part of trust that is a big part of that journey is just, you have to earn trust, right? It has to, you know, especially when you have characters like this who have like traumatic pasts and these kind of difficulties. So yeah.
I agree that you have to like earn trust. In my book, though, he has this kind of built-in trust with his family. So like all he knows is that his mom and his sister have been taking care of him the entire life. And so like what they say rings true. So like why would he not believe them? Why would he not trust them? And then he's been kept away from humans his entire life. So he's been kind of taught to like not trust like the normal world. He doesn't know why. He just knows his mom kind of has a chip on her shoulder against like, should we trust humans? Should we not? That kind of thing. And then she kind of takes it on her own heart to like let the boy next door move into the apartment in the building she owns. And then he starts to kind of see like, oh, maybe humans aren't that bad. And maybe I can trust this boy. And maybe my mom was wrong. Maybe my sister was wrong, that kind of thing. So then the trust falls with one, but then it starts to gain with the other. So it's just kind of this push and pull throughout the entire book of like, who's really to be trusted, who's not? Because then there's this whole like thing with like, who's breaking into the garden, who's stealing things, who's killing things. And you see side characters come up of like friends of the boy next door and like that kind of thing. And it's like, who could this be? And so like there's this constant air of like, how much trust can you really put in? And I mean, with Quill, like the main character, he starts to kind of sacrifice his own trustworthiness too by kind of lying by omission and kind of telling half truths to his parents or his mom and his sister. You know, not lying necessarily, but it's something like we all did when we were rebellious and we all wanted to like sneak out to a high school party, or maybe that's just me, I don't know. But and then it kind of goes into the same thing of like how much just trust and sacrifice come into this, because like we've sacrificed so much. Mom has sacrificed a life in the real world to keep her kids safe and her family safe. And then like Quill has sacrificed his entire childhood to like stay with his family and like fulfill their expectations of him. And then Liam has his whole other thing, the love interests, but I don't want to spoil that. So yeah, trust is a huge, huge thing in this book. And you see it a lot where like even Quill goes back and forth being like, I said this and it's not totally true. And I feel bad that I said that. But how bad do I really feel? Like...
Yeah, I loved how both of your books are set in so many different places, but they share this like feeling or this pit in my stomach where I felt while reading both of your books, where I'm like, I don't know, do I trust like anybody? Who do I trust? Like, does anyone trust anyone really? Right? Kind of what we're both talking about, where there's this earning and this dynamic of building it and also kind of like chipping away at it at some points as too, it's not always like a exponential linear line. There's like up and downs. I want to talk something about chosen ones, and I think that we've already talked a little bit about it in So Let Them Burn and Dead Things Are Closer Than They Appear, but I would love to know from both of you, since you're both playing with this idea from very different angles, but also having a very similar conversation at the same time about who is the one with power and what does that mean. So I'd love for both of you could talk about the conception with specifically that concept and talking about the conversations of who has power, who has the right to power. Camilla, do you want to start?
Sure. So for me personally, I have always loved a chosen one story. It just wasn't a kind of story that I ever really saw myself in as, a Black woman, as an immigrant, as, just some girl. But like as a kid, I was always looking for like that magic and the underpinning of the world. I was checking the back of wardrobes for like a secret door to Narnia. And I was like waiting for someone to come and tell me that I was, a secret princess of a fairy world or something like that. Like I really so badly wanted to be special, and for like, I'm sure many of us have the same story of like not feeling like we fit in, maybe even being bullied a little. I was waiting for someone to come and tell me that everything that I had been through was just like the prologue of a larger magical adventure that I was meant to be on. So I completely ate up chosen one stories, and that never faded even as other people got sick of chosen one stories. But when it came time for me to write one, I found myself less interested in the story of how you go from being an ordinary person to, being the chosen one, and more interested in how you go from being the chosen one to being an ordinary person. At the time that I was writing So Let Them Burn, I was reading stuff like Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth and Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. You know, these stories that, like The Afterword by E.K. Johnson, these stories that examine the what comes after the war, what comes after the adventure. And, you know, that seemed to me like a really, really rich storytelling thing, because the thing you don't realize about Narnia, or maybe, you know, you do, is that, you know, those kids had those magic adventures, but then they went back to their lives. And how do you go back to your life when you grew into a whole entire adult and ruled an entire country and had all this power, and then you fall out of the wardrobe and you're still like, what, 15? Like, it's a crazy thing. So yeah, when it came to that, I really wanted to examine the idea of like, you had this big adventure, you had all this power, and maybe you still have some of it because of what you did, but like, you're living a normal life now. And how do you adjust back to that? How do you deal with the trauma, the nightmares, the PTSD? How do you deal with going from, you know, being in this like high stress, high impact, like you got to stay alive situation? Like, how do those relationships change when you're not just surviving, you're living? So Let Them Burn was always meant to be like a story to kind of examine those questions, because I think that, as interesting as it is to look at going, you know, into a situation where you're gaining power and making decisions that, you know, impact a whole wealth of people beyond yourself, I think it's like equally interesting and maybe like very important to see how you go from having the power to impact so many people to then just living for yourself. Like, how do you move on? What does the world look like for you after you've been through something like that? And especially when you've been through it so young, when your brain's not even fully developed yet, you know? So it was not the take on The Chosen One I was expecting to write when I was looking in ponds and hoping that a witch from another world would look back at me. But I think that, you know, this is the story that I had to get old enough to write, because those are questions that I think would have been more important to me as a kid to figure out how to live my normal life. So yeah, I hope I answered the question, Robin.
It's really interesting that you said that, like, because I also was that girl who, you know, never really saw myself in those stories either. And sort of, I grew up on the CW, so it was always just like, I grew up in a small town too, so I'm like, why is there no magic here? And I think that, like, so I also like wanted to play with the idea of the Chosen One story, and it also went in a direction that I hadn't anticipated at first, because Sid is that girl too. Sid wants to be extraordinary. She wants to matter. She wants to like not be invisible in this town where, like, if anything happens, it doesn't happen to her. So like, my idea of this story sort of came from like, everyone else is chosen except for her. So she just happens to be there. She lives in this town where there's like, it's a kind of a slightly extraordinary town that people just sort of go with. Other people have magical powers, and she's just sort of a high school student, like trying to like deal with like romance and best friends and all of that. So for me, it was basically like, she becomes the hero based on the fact that like the villain just sort of happened to be her foil, and that had it been any other villain or any other situation, she would not have been the one. And the only reason she was the one was because of the people that she met. It's the friends we made along the way, literally. But her power was contingent on other people. And that kind of came to me based on like, when I was young, like in college and just out of college. So like 20 years ago, I'm sorry if that makes like everyone feel really young or really old, but anyhow, it makes me feel really old. I was a teaching assistant for a political science course for high schoolers. It was like a college level. They would get credit for it, and I was a teaching assistant. Whether or not I was qualified is I don't know. But one of the things that we talked about, it was very liberal biased. I didn't have a problem with that. But we were talking about socialism one day, and it seemed to be like a very lots of people were saying it would never work here in the United States because like our motivation is to sort of be better than someone else, that it wasn't even about making money. You had to make more than someone. So like no one would want to, like if your basic needs were met, if everyone's basic needs were met, no one would want to be a doctor if they made the same amount as somebody who was a janitor. And that was sort of the argument, that like people only cared about themselves and getting ahead, which is to me a very US Western mindset. So my chosen one idea sort of morphed into this like collectivism versus the individualism. And like, do you use power to advance yourself or to advance everyone? And I think like in order for power to truly be shared in that way, it's kind of like a learned thing, especially for people in the US, to that you have to be in community with other people. You have to believe that no one wins unless we all win. And so like with my book, I tell people that it's about empathy or exercising empathy. She was sort of meant to like start off as being like very self-focused and very like self-absorbed about like having power and like, you know, being better and like being extraordinary. But like in the end, like it's when she learns to sort of look outside herself, that is the very thing that saves them all. So I think like in the end, like what it is that they are all chosen ones. And she couldn't have won without them. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. But yeah, I sort of went from like somebody who wanted to be extraordinary, who like learns that like everyone is.
Yeah, I love that is that sort of TLDR wrap up of that, like just that theme of it in of itself and the way that you talk about getting strength from other people and like the community and your friends around you. It was a very touching ending to your story. Next, I want to talk about settings, and specifically, I think in Where the Dark Stands Still and Daughter of the Bone Forest, they're both very forest-heavy books. And so I want to know from both of you how you created that setting, but also I felt like in some parts of the book, they almost become sort of secondary characters in and of itself. You know, there's a liveliness and like I don't know if I would say consciousness or like sentience, but there's something special, something like a little bit eerie, honestly, about both of them. So from each of you, I'd love to know if you could talk about creating that setting like throughout the entire drafting and editing process, and how you approached the intersection of setting history within your own world building and like the characters in relation to that. Jasmine, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, but the settings, even though I had the initial ideas beforehand, the settings in my book were really inspired by Oregon. I've had to travel to Oregon for work every year for the last 5 years, and sometimes multiple times a year, and gotten to visit these really extraordinary places like Mount Hood and Crater Lake and Multnomah Falls. And so the Bone Forest and Daughter of the Bone Forest was really, really heavily inspired by those deep, deep pine forests that exist on the coastal side of the Cascades. So if you don't know the Cascade Mountains, they're all volcanoes, and they are large enough to cast a rain shadow. So on one side is a desert. On the eastern side of the Cascades is a high desert. And there is a desert in my books as well, the Obsidian Desert, because there is actual obsidian, from the calderas and volcanoes there. But that's not the forest question. So the other side of the volcanoes is these deep pine forests and this really fertile ground. That's where a lot of the produce, a lot of the fruit specifically that we get in the United States comes from that region, especially berries and things like that. So I was very interested in these really, really big, dense pine forests. And that sort of like sparked the initial idea of this bone forest, because one day when I was visiting Oregon and we were driving up towards Mount Hood, there was this very dense fog that just was rolling down from the mountainside into the pine forest. And it was just going like not over the trees, but through them. And it was this eerie, I tried to take a picture and the picture did not capture what I was seeing. So I was like, well, 1,000 words are worth a picture. So I guess I'll write 1,000 words, right? That was the very beginning of the Bone Forest, which is this like sort of sentient, it's alive by magic, but not by, there's not like a consciousness that's like a singular consciousness necessarily. But the magic that is seeped into this land has given it something of a personality and something of a goal of its own and its own sort of like motivations as a character. And so my main character grew up on the edge of this forest and actually grew up running into the forest, even though this is a forest where like everyone's like, it's super dangerous, it kills people, it's it's literally a forest of the dead, like don't go in there. But she has always loved it and always lived next to it and visited it. And her grandmother has been imprisoned inside the Bone Forest. 6 years ago, she was imprisoned for attacking an officer of the army. And so for the last 6 years, her grandmother has lived in the forest, and my main character has been the one that has like gone to visit her and bring her food and like, has this motivation around like trying to save her grandmother. That is the initial sort of quest that takes her to the magic school. But that connection to the Bone Forest is a huge part of my main character's desire to go back home. Even when she's off at this magic school and stuff is happening, she just wants to go back home and go back to her forest and go back to the simple life that she knew. So
I love that image of the fog rolling into the forest. That sounds amazing. I think I have kind of a similar, like, I grew up when I was younger, my parents used to send me to Poland every summer, to my grandparents' house. And my grandfather has this property that's kind of surrounded by forest, especially back then. Now there's a lot of houses being built there, but at the time it was basically all forest. So I kind of just grew up in this place, always surrounded by nature. And I always loved nature, and Polish people especially, I find, like, in my family, but also in general, like, they tend to love forests. And there's a big, like, a big emphasis on, like, gathering from the forest. We love to go out and like gather mushrooms, gather wild blueberries. It's a really big kind of like family event in Poland to go out into the forest and kind of live off of the forest as much as you can. Hiking is a really big thing. So, and Poland really takes care of its forests. So I think there's like an intrinsic connection between Poland and forest and Polish folklore, also exemplified by all of these forest demons that exist in Slavic mythology, especially the Leshy, who is in mythology the protector of forests, whose kind of job is to either guide people through the forest if he likes them, and then if he doesn't like them, he'll like take them into the forest and they get lost and you never see them again. Which I love that dichotomy between, like, in a lot of Slavic demons, where they're either good or they're bad, depending on whether or not you're pleasing them and doing what they want. But I think that was really something that I wanted to explore, was this connection that Polish folklore has to forests, and kind of really pay homage to like that aspect of my childhood, and kind of like this idea of, the forest being both this extremely dangerous place, but also a place that provides life, and I think that was a lot of fun. And also the fact that, in my book, the magic that they're called charovnik in the book. That's what the wizards are called, and their magic makes things sentient. Basically, if an object spends enough time around somebody with magic, it develops a sentience, which is why the manor is sentient, and the forest is sentient as well. And that kind of came about in my second draft. It wasn't in my first draft. And as I got into the second draft, I started to develop the magic system more and more, and kind of like explore why, how it works, why it works. I ended up kind of imbuing a lot of sentience into these things surrounding the main character and the Leshy, her love interest. And that's how the forest kind of took on a bit of a personality of its own, and also like became my favorite aspect of it has always been that, like, while the forest was created by the Leshy, who's this kind of like really taciturn, not very pleasant person, especially at first, it doesn't really like him. and it likes Liska, the main character, a lot more because she's like this caretaker. Her personality is very caring, very almost, I would say she's the mom friend. She's very motherly, and so she likes to take care of things around her. And because she's this like optimist and this caring person, the forest likes her, and it does what she wants and not what the less she wants. And she basically kind of like hijacks the forest from him, and that was one of my favorite elements to write. So it was an interesting relationship to explore.
Yeah, and I also love in the book watching her get to know the forest, like explore it and develop that relationship. I thought you did a really great job at sort of using that as an entry point for us as readers, but also to understand the other characters in the actual world and the magic. I'm going to pivot to questions from the audience. So last chance, obviously, put the questions in the chat if you have any, but we have some, and I want to start off by asking, we have a question for Camilla and Devin about what was your favorite thing about debuting? Since you both have your books out already, I think that it's related to like the post debut kind of feeling.
My favorite thing about debuting was the book being out. I feel like the 2 or 3 weeks before my book came out were some of the most anxious, panic-inducing, like sobbing every day, can't eat, can't sleep.
We talked about this,
We
didn't
did.
we?
We were literally commiserating about how miserable we
We're like, is this real? Is this how it should feel? Is this happening?
We're like, are we supposed to be super happy? Because in fact, we both need therapy. But yeah, it was the day that the book came out. I literally woke up and I was like, it's over. It's out. Like, this doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the world. And don't get me wrong, that's a different kind of terrifying. But for me, it was just like, it feels like when the book comes out, it's like, I can't do anything else. So I have to like enjoy what I can now. Whereas before it was like, I only have 2 weeks until this book comes out. Maybe I should throw up another promo post, or like, I only have 2 days until this book comes out. Maybe I should do another giveaway, like anything, everything. But then when the book comes out, you're like, it's too late now. Everything's over. I have to live. So for me, paradoxically, that was like, it was like this huge weight off my shoulder. And, you know, I also just really love seeing my book. Like when people take pictures of my book anywhere is my favorite part. Devin?
The Instagram posts have been heartwarming, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
But like, again, those first few weeks leading up to it, it's like, you have this illusion that you have control, and you don't. You really don't at all. Like, you just kind of got to ride the wave and take it day by day. Don't read the reviews and
Cry
just
if you
stay
need
calm.
to.
Cry, stay calm. You know, if it's a particularly bad day, go home, have a nice cocktail. It's fine. It'll be a-okay. Because at the end of the day, like, the amount of love you get back from people who truly enjoyed your book is really gratifying, and it's really heartwarming, and it kind of makes it all worth it at the end of the day. So
Yeah, 100%.
Okay,
we
we
just,
got. Oh, sorry.
Robin and Anya and I are over here like,
Yeah. You know what? It's good to hear though. It's in preparation for upcoming launches, because that's how it feels right now. Is very like, I need to put up another post. I need to put up this. I need to do that. I need to do that. So it's nice to hear it'll end eventually.
It's like, you know, logically that you have no control over this. Like, your brain knows that you can't do anything, that your publisher can't do better if they're doing anything at all. But like emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, you're like, I'm not doing enough.
You just need to be active
it's
somehow.
true.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like you go through so many edit processes and the plotting and the beta readers, and like you're actively like doing things to make the book better. But once you send that last edit in, baby, it's over. It's done.
You done,
It's
guys.
done.
I listened to my audiobook because I got sent the preview of the audiobook and heard a typo, and I was like,
Yup.
There's like nothing I can do now.
This is exactly why I refuse to open my book. I have the final copies in now, and I'm like, I will not open it. I do not want to look inside. I know I will find a typo. It's not getting never again.
I have not read this in one.
Yeah, no, I'm never reading mine. I'm
and
like,
I
it's
was
good.
Oh. Anyway, it's fine.
Yeah, I feel like I've been moderating these debut panels for a while now, and I feel like it's this weird like dichotomy between beforehand. Also, there's so many steps. Everything has this momentum and the sense of urgency, and then you get to that point, and it releases, and it just like all falls away, and it almost feels a little bit, as someone who's never had a book being published, it almost feels like this sort of loss of motion, right? Like being disoriented and not really knowing like what's supposed to happen, and releasing control is such a difficult thing to do. One question that we got, which I really love, is that if your book was adapted into a movie, TV series, any sort of visual medium like that, do you have a dream cast in mind for the main character or main characters, depending?
So I can't write at all unless I face cast my characters because I have no concept of what a human being looks like. So before I get started, the very first thing that I do is get myself a face cast. So I had, when I was first writing the book, I had Chloe and Halle Bailey as my face cast for Farron and Alara. But since then, they have gotten considerably older than they looked on like Grownish or whatever. So now my face cast for them is I would like Sky Jackson to play Alara, and I would like Leah Jeffries who's playing Annabelle in the new Percy Jackson to be Farron. I think that those two would be great. I think they look enough like siblings to pull it off, and I just think they're amazing actors. So yeah.
This is really interesting because I'm the complete opposite. I cannot face cast my characters. Like I refuse. Like I think maybe it's because I've never really like found people who I think would suit the characters, but I was an artist for most of high school. I did that was how I made money through high school, as I did character design. And because of that, I think that my kind of vision of my characters is so clear, and I'm always like, there's no one. So like in terms of like if I were to cast them for something, I'm like it would never happen, but I would want it to be animated. I wouldn't want it to be live action because I'm like, the only way that you can do these characters in a way that I feel like would really match my vision would be to animate them. And so that I could, you can have perfect control over their appearances. So I just think it's interesting. Like I could never do the face cast. Like I've always wanted to because I see people's face casts. I'm like, oh, those are so cool. And then I like sit down, I'm like, nope, there's no one. Absolutely no one.
No, it's just so funny for me because I feel like with Dragon media, everything that I saw that I loved was like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. It was like the Aragon movie. I mean, not the Aragon movie, but the Aragon movie, like super live action dragons. So I always I want a show that is has the big budget and CGI of Game of Thrones, but I want Black people in it. So I've never done the animated thing, but you're right, that would be really cool for your book.
I'd be down for an animation because I can't face cast mine either. I compare their personalities to characters that are already written. So Quill is Toph from The Last Airbender, and Janice Ian from Mean Girls. So imagine what that would be like to just put them in the same body. Total chaos Muppet, let's be real. But as far as the face goes, I don't know, can we get those Heartstopper boys over here for a hot second? That would just be the perfect pairing, in my opinion.
I really, 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 really want a face cast, but y'all need to give me a pool. I don't have a pool to face cast from. There needs to be more young, Asian American actors. Obviously, there are Korean actors in Korea, but this character is very Korean American, but they're too beautiful. what I will do, I definitely have face cast ordinary people that like from like image searches that I obviously can't post or show because it's just like some random person's Facebook. Like I can't be like, this is Sid Spencer. But like I have done that where I've been like, she is perfect and she's just like this girl. So that's like what I'm looking for. Like I'm looking for someone who's not like a model and who's Korean American. So please, universe, do that for me. Give me a pool.
I think I have a similar but very opposite thing with Rosie. She's just a blonde-haired white girl. Like she could be anyone. It doesn't matter. Like I don't have like a perfect Rosie. It could be any up and coming young blonde actress. I would like her not to be that pretty, like in a similar way. Like she's meant to be a very plain looking person because her prettiness is in like her sense of self, not in her physical appearance. But you know how it is with TV. They're going to make her pretty, whatever. It's fine. But with the love interest, Shaw, like she is Chinook in this like YA fantasy world, but her people, racially are inspired by like the broad Chinook peoples. And so there's not enough like young Native American actresses that I could use to face cast Shaw or many of the other characters in this book. So I would love to like see see it if my book ever got an adaptation, to like have it be an opportunity for someone or some people to get cast that like wouldn't otherwise have had an opportunity to be cast. But what I will say is my grandma, Rosie's grandma, I want to be Jamie Lee Curtis. I think that'd be fun.
I think when you first said that, I was like, oh, interesting choice. But now the more I think about it, I feel like it could work.
She's got the sass. That's all I want.
The same almost like unhingedness a little bit too. I think
Yes.
that they would like match energy really well.
Exactly.
The final question we have is for Anya. Oh, hit my bookcase for Anya. And I want to ask the second part because I think it's really interesting. Was there anything part of Polish folklore that you wanted to include but didn't or couldn't in your book?
I mean, there's a lot that I wanted to include, but I didn't. But there's always like, there were little things I slipped into this book that were just like elements of kind of being raised in Poland that I feel like a lot of people don't know because they're just like these tiny little things. But one thing, this is very silly, but one thing that I really wanted to put in this book and I didn't manage to was Poland is obsessed with storks. We call them bociany. They're like white storks. I don't know what they're actually called. Like in Polish, they're called bociany, and they are everywhere in Poland. And they build these giant nests on like telephone poles or roofs, especially in the countryside. We love them in Poland. And I was like, I wanted to find the opportunity to just put a stork nest in there somewhere and just like have storks present, like just one scene, one little description where she's like, and the storks are like, and they're there. But like, I never managed to fit them in the book. And that is my biggest regret, is there are no storks in Where the Dark Stands Still. But there's always like,
obviously.
Deleted scene in the paperback. I'm waiting.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
A full 10 pages of just storks hanging out in the Where the Dark Stands Still world.
No
like nothing
plot,
else.
just storks.
Just storks, exactly.
Drop the stork cut.
Yeah, if you ever do bonus content, we already all agree it has to have storks in it. Like,
Yeah.
that's the new thing. This was such an amazing thing. I have so many times just like forgotten to unmute myself because I'm too busy listening. But I also want to remind everyone, since we have a mix of authors whose books have come out already, authors whose books you can still pre-order. So all the bookshop.org links are in the description box below. Oh, this is so fun. Below. So definitely go pre-order them and go pick up everyone's books who's already released. I hope you all have a really great rest of your day. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to the authors for taking the time out of their day also to chat about your book with everybody. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.